That should not be there. A curse sounds like the kind of thing people attach to what they fear. Something old. Something avoided. Something already marked before anyone gets too close. That feels easy to accept. If enough people repeat it, the label starts to feel natural, almost expected. And at first, maybe that is all this was supposed to be. Just a name people gave it. A warning. A habit. The kind of thing that stays in place because no one bothers to question it. But then something does not sit right. Because if it was only fear, it should have stayed simple. It should have remained one of those things people say and move on from. Instead, it keeps pressing back in a way it should not. The association holds on too tightly. It shows up where it should have faded. It lingers where a simple explanation should have been enough. You can try to treat it like superstition. That would make sense. You can try to treat it like exaggeration. That would make sense too. But the more you leave it there, the less settled it feels. So why was it associated with a curse? At first, the association seems almost automatic. A plastered doorway, still stamped with royal seals, stands at the end of a narrow corridor cut into rock. The floor before it holds broken seal impressions and pale chips of plaster. Small evidence that a boundary once existed, and was then breached. If a king was buried behind a marked closure, and if that closure was meant to remain intact, then the first explanation presents itself without much strain. The curse belonged to the act of crossing that threshold. Inside, the explanation appears stronger. In the coffin chamber, under a single lamp, a gold funerary mask lies over a wrapped face. It is not displayed, not stored, not hidden as treasure in the ordinary sense. It is fitted to a body. Around it stand shrines, draped in linen, and black jackal figures keep watch from the edges of the room. The arrangement is protective from every angle: enclosure, covering, guardians, sealing. A sacred funerary object in a sealed royal burial does not need a written threat to feel dangerous. The danger seems built into placement alone. That would account for the later reputation. Disturb a king's burial, remove what was meant to preserve him, and harm follows. Ancient Egyptian tomb protection beliefs are enough to make the connection plausible, even before any later story grows around it. The mask was associated with a curse because it came from a place already organized against intrusion. But the physical record introduces a narrower question. Where, exactly, is the warning? The broken plaster at the entrance marks violation, yet the doorway itself is administrative as much as sacred. Seals, closure, control. In the burial rooms, the jackals and shrines imply protection, but implication is not inscription. The mask covers the mummy as funerary equipment. It does not stand apart as a threatening object. If the curse attached specifically to the mask, what on its surface announced that role? The lamp catches only polished gold, inlaid eyes, the striped headdress, the false beard. No visible sentence of retaliation appears across the face. The object's function seems preservative, not punitive. That should narrow the explanation. Perhaps the curse was never on the mask itself, only on the tomb as a whole. Yet the mask remains the image most people remember. Not the plastered doorway, not the sealed corridor, not the shrine walls. Why did the association settle on this object so firmly? Because it was the nearest thing to the king's person? Because it covered the face and therefore seemed to hold identity in a way the doorway did not? The burial chamber suggests that possibility. The mask is not merely present in the tomb. It occupies the exact point where the dead ruler's body, status, and afterlife protection meet. That makes the curse feel less like a spoken formula, and more like a condition of disturbance. Still, the floor outside the entrance complicates even that. The seals were already broken in antiquity before modern discovery, and the chamber had not remained perfectly untouched. If violation alone produced the danger, then whose violation mattered? The first, the latest, or every one of them? The doorway, the mask, the guardians, the wrappings, each points toward protection, but none yet isolates why this gold face, above all, became the object people called cursed. At first, the association seems easy to account for. A table disappears under newspapers. Heavy black headlines, The tomb entrance photograph repeated from paper to paper. The same doorway with its broken plaster and royal seals turned into proof that something old had been forced open. The wording grows bolder as it spreads. A king's grave. A warning from antiquity. A curse. Once Lord Carnarvon is dead only weeks after the opening, the sequence looks complete enough for print. A darkened bedroom. A bed. A shaded lamp. A body under sheets. The room supplies the image the headlines need. That would explain why the mask became part of the curse story, even though it was not found lying alone as a threatening object. It covered the face inside the burial, the most visible and royal thing in the chamber, once photographs circulate. If a death follows the opening of a sealed king's tomb, the gold face becomes the public face of the danger. The logic is crude, but it holds. Sacred burial disturbed. Patron dead. Object from the burial fixed in memory. Then the chronology starts attracting more names than one death can support. On a wall of portrait photographs, several frames carry black ribbons. The list of misfortunes expands by association. Not only the man who financed the excavation, but secretaries, visitors, officials, people who had been near the tomb, near the burial, near the story. The curse begins to look less like a single event and more like a spreading pattern. That, too, seems to explain the mask's reputation. It was not merely present at the opening. It became the emblem under which unrelated losses could be gathered. But the pattern depends on distance being ignored. Some of the dead never handled the burial chamber. Some were linked by acquaintance, by timing, by mention in the press. The newspapers do not sort exposure by degree. They flatten it. A photograph of the entrance sits beside a death notice, and the gap between them closes in the reader's mind. If that is enough, then why does the crowd outside the museum case gather, as if the danger resides in the mask itself? Barriers hold them back from a gold face under glass, not from a corridor in the Valley of the Kings, not from a mosquito bite, not from infection, not from the ordinary causes that fill death certificates. The object's placement matters. In the public imagination, the burial is too large and too remote to hold steady. The mask is compact, visible, repeatable. A sealed chamber can be described, but a gold face can be stared at. The curse needs an image, and the mask supplies one. That makes the association feel almost procedural. Death occurs. Headlines search for a symbol. The symbol hardens into cause. Yet the wall of ribbon portraits raises another problem. How many deaths are enough to make a curse? And how many living faces must be omitted to preserve it? The newspapers on the table do not answer that. They only keep the doorway and the gold face in circulation, as if repetition itself were evidence. If the mask was associated with a curse, the simplest place to look would be its surface. A warning should be visible somewhere. Along the brow, inside the collar bands, around the edge where gold meets linen. But under gallery light the face stays uninterrupted. Blue glass stripes, inlaid eyes, polished cheeks, false beard, and no carved threat anywhere. The object behaves like equipment, not proclamation. It was made to cover a wrapped head inside nested coffins, not to confront intruders at a doorway. That seems to settle one part of the question. The curse was not written onto the mask itself. Then the chronology in the room complicates that comfort. The mask became famous because it was found where a king had been sealed away, and because deaths after the opening were attached to that burial, as if they radiated from everything inside it. Yet, the people nearest the find do not line up with the story people remember. Carter appears years later beside the mask, older, composed, hair gone gray under museum lamps. Group photographs of excavators and officials do not show a field of absences. Many of the men who entered the chambers, cataloged objects, supervised packing, and watched the coffins open did not drop in sequence around the discovery. So, perhaps the curse story grew by selecting a few deaths and ignoring the longer list of survivals. That explanation fits the records neatly enough. A sealed royal tomb is opened, one prominent patron dies, newspapers need a pattern, and the mask, being the most recognizable object, absorbs the fear. But if publicity alone did the work, Why did this burial attract that pattern so easily while other excavations did not seize the public in quite the same way? The answer seems to lie not in headlines first, but in the arrangement inside the chamber. The mask was not isolated treasure. It rested within a dense funerary system. Wrappings, amulets, coffins inside coffins, shrines around coffins, all directed toward preserving a dead king's body and identity. In that setting, the object's function changes the question. It is not a cursed thing in the ordinary sense. It belongs to a protected condition. That would explain why no inscription is needed. A warning can be structural rather than verbal. The sealed chamber, the layered enclosure, the placement over the face of the mummy. These already declare that the burial is not meant to be entered casually. Yet another detail resists closure. If the danger was understood as part of the whole burial system, why did later retellings fasten so tightly to the mask in particular? The answer should be visibility. The mask is the burial made legible in one image. But visibility is not the same as cause. The gold face in photographs looks singular, self-contained, almost like an object that could carry its own agency. Inside the tomb, it was one component among many. Outside the tomb, it became the burial's stand-in. And that leaves the association in an awkward place. Not a written curse on the mask. Not a clean chain of deaths among those who handled it. Not merely invention either, because the burial itself was built as a protected royal enclosure, whose disturbance already invited fear. The mask sits at the center of that confusion. Silent on its surface, ordinary in function, and somehow still the image people reached for when they needed the curse to have a face. At first, the association looks easy to account for. The burial chamber is not arranged like a place meant to be entered and left. Coffin walls and shrine panels are crowded with hieroglyphic columns. Not a single warning line placed for a trespasser, but dense protective writing, wrapped around the king's resting place itself. The texts face inward with the rest of the burial equipment, toward the dead ruler and the work his body still had to do. If harm was expected, it was not the harm of a trap. It was the harm of interruption. That seems to explain why the mask drew the curse story to itself. It was not just gold over a face. Its inlaid eyes, striped knees, and false beard present the king as he needed to remain. Recognizable, complete, divine. The object sits above the wrapped chest as part of a larger mechanism of preservation. Around it, one coffin fits inside another. Around those, gilded shrines fill the chamber so tightly that the room seems built less for access than for resistance. The arrangement suggests a practical religious problem. If the body were damaged, displaced, or left unprotected, the king's afterlife identity could be in danger. In that setting, curse begins to sound like a later word for an older danger. Then the chamber itself complicates that neat reading. If the threat lay in a general sacred enclosure, why does the burial rely on so many layers? A wrapped body lies beneath gold, wood, resin, and linen, each material adding another barrier, another surface between the outer room and the corpse. The redundancy is striking. One enclosure might preserve 4 or 5, imply anxiety. Was ordinary funerary protection enough, or was this burial guarding against something more specific? Decay, theft, ritual error, damage to the face, damage to the name? The mask sharpens that question, rather than settling it. It does not carry a carved curse sentence. No direct formula on its surface announces punishment for anyone who looks on it. Its smooth gold face offers no threat at all, yet it occupies the most exposed symbolic position in the burial package, where identity is concentrated. If the Egyptians feared injury to the afterlife body, then the mask's role was not to attack intruders, but to prevent a more serious loss. The king becoming unusable to eternity. That makes the later curse story feel less like invention and more like mistranslation. Still, the physical arrangement leaves an awkward detail. Protective texts cover coffin panels and shrine walls, but the mask itself remains visually serene, almost silent. If later observers fixed on the mask as the cursed object, why not the shrines, the inscriptions, the nested coffins? Why did public fear condense around the face? Perhaps because the face made the burial's purpose legible at a glance. Not storage, but restoration. A sealed chamber can be mistaken for secrecy. A gold face over a wrapped head makes the stakes visible. And yet, the chamber keeps pressing back. The more completely the body is enclosed, the less the idea of a single cursed object fits the evidence. The danger seems distributed across the whole arrangement. Texts, wrappings, coffins, shrines, body. If so, the question changes. The mask was associated with a curse not because it carried one alone, but because it was the most visible part of burial system, designed to keep a king intact after death. But if that is the real source of danger, why does the burial look so heavily defended, as though protection had to be repeated, reinforced, and checked again? At first, the curse seems easy to place. A royal burial is opened, a funerary mask lifted from the face of a dead king, and later deaths gather around the story. That sequence is clean enough for headlines. But the mask itself does not stay clean under inspection. In close light, the gold face carries two small pierced holes in the ears. They are neat, deliberate, and difficult to ignore once seen beneath the striped headdress. For a moment they offer a practical answer to the curse association. If the burial was not standard even at the moment of interment, then perhaps the unease around it began there. Not with modern intrusion, but with something already irregular in the king's preparation. An adult male pharaoh is not usually shown this way. The mask looks royal, finished, authoritative, and then the ears interrupt that certainty. The interruption might still be minor. A workshop variation. A symbolic choice. That would keep the larger picture intact. Sacred object. Sealed tomb. Later fear. Yet under raking light, the gold itself starts separating into categories. The beard does not quite match the face. The face does not quite match the headdress. Slight tonal differences appear across surfaces that are supposed to read as one continuous royal image. If the alloys differ, then the mask is not simply one uninterrupted conception carried through from design to burial. It begins to look assembled, or at least revised. That would explain the ears. A piece made for one purpose, adjusted for another. A burial completed under pressure. The curse story would then attach not to a uniquely dangerous object, but to a funerary object already carrying signs of compromise. This feels closer to the evidence because the irregularities are physical, measurable, and all on the mask itself. Then the cartouche complicates the repair. On the surface where the king's name should settle the matter, altered signs appear cut over an earlier arrangement. The inscription does not behave like an untouched dedication. It behaves like a correction. If the name was changed, the question is no longer only why the mask looks unusual for Tutankhamun. It becomes, for whom was it first intended? Reuse would account for almost everything visible so far. Pierced ears, mixed alloys, adjusted inscription, fitted sections. A mask redirected from another royal burial could carry all of that without requiring any supernatural explanation at all. The later curse would then be a misunderstanding, layered over an object whose real disturbance happened in the workshop and burial chamber before the tomb was sealed. But the seams and joins keep the answer from settling. Close views show separate sections fitted together with a precision that suggests planning, not mere salvage. Some parts look adapted, others look purpose-made. Reuse alone explains the altered name, yet does not fully explain why the whole still resolves so convincingly into a coherent funerary image. Improvisation explains the mismatched metals, but not why the iconography remains so controlled. So the mask sits in an awkward position. Too irregular for a perfectly prepared burial. Too integrated to dismiss as a patchwork accident. If the burial was already troubled before discovery, then the curse attached to more than a broken seal and a dead patron. It attached to a royal object whose own surface preserves signs of interruption. Signs that suggest the king entered eternity through arrangements made under strain, with older identities not entirely erased. At first, the curse seems easy to place. A king dies young, is sealed into a cramped tomb, and centuries later the burial is open. But the mask does not sit alone in that story. Around the small royal mummy, the chamber is crowded, almost to inconvenience. Coffins within coffins, equipment pressed close, objects packed, where a larger royal burial would have allowed order. The arrangement suggests urgency before it suggests menacing. If the burial was assembled under pressure, then perhaps the later curse attached itself not to one object, but to a disturbed royal funeral whose protections had been hurried into place. That explanation gains weight when the goods are examined one by one. In the burial chamber, names do not always begin where they seem to begin. On some objects, earlier inscriptions have been erased. On others, cartouches have been recut and fresh signs inserted into older surfaces. A burial assembled from adapted equipment would explain the unevenness. It would also explain why the mask became such a powerful focus later. Not because it carried a unique spell, but because it was the most visible face of a burial already marked by interruption. Yet, if adaptation was merely practical, why is it so widespread? Why do so many objects show the same pressure of revision? The answer appears outside the tomb. Earlier blocks preserve the imagery of Aten worship. Later temple reliefs restore Amun and the older cults. The sequence is historical before it is supernatural. Tutankhamun's reign stood in the aftermath of the Amarna upheaval, when royal religion had been broken, redirected, and then publicly repaired. A rushed burial in that climate would not be surprising. A dead king needed to be placed back inside the restored order quickly, correctly, and with enough traditional equipment to secure his afterlife. The curse story now seems to have a firmer base. Later, deaths were fitted onto the memory of a burial, formed during a period already charged with religious disruption. Then the chamber itself keeps asking for more. The equipment is not only reused, it is mismatched. Pieces differ in scale, finish, and style. Some seem made for one set, others borrowed from another. The compact tomb intensifies the problem. Was this simply the burial of a young ruler who died unexpectedly, forcing officials to gather what they could? If so, why do the alterations look so deliberate in some places, and so hurried in others? Why do erased names sit beside fresh inscriptions that appear carefully cut? Improvisation explains crowding, but not always selection. And the mask remains inside that pressure. It belongs to a burial, where continuity had to be manufactured. Names corrected, identities stabilized, cult restored, royal form completed before decomposition and ritual deadlines overtook the court. That would make later talk of a curse understandable. Disturbing such a burial would mean reopening not just a tomb, but a repair. Yet, another detail intrudes. If the burial had already been assembled from adapted materials during a politically unstable restoration, then what exactly was being protected when the tomb was sealed? The king, the dynasty, or a fragile claim that the old order had truly been put back together? The mask sits behind glass now, motionless under white gallery lights. Behind it, enlarged photographs show the plastered doorway at the end of the rock-cut corridor, the royal seals, the broken patches where entry began. That pairing seems to answer the question at once. A king had been enclosed, protected, and then exposed. The object over his face was not jewelry or display. It was funerary equipment placed to preserve him forever. If later deaths gathered around the opening of the tomb, the association almost writes itself. A sacred burial was disturbed, and the mask became the visible face of that disturbance. The museum wall helps that reading along. Beside the calm gold face hangs a newspaper headline about death after the excavation. The old formula is easy to reconstruct from the record. Sealed chamber, open tomb, prominent death, then repetition in print until coincidence acquires a pattern. A curse does not need to be found on the object if the burial itself already carries danger in public imagination. That would explain why the mask, more than the shrines or coffins, absorbed the story. It is the part that looks back, yet the surface offers no warning. Up close, the gold face remains uninterrupted by any carved threat. No direct curse sentence, no command to intruders, no inscription naming punishment. The mask belongs among nested coffins, amulets, wrappings, and protective texts elsewhere in the burial assemblage. It functions as part of a system around the dead king, not as a standalone trap. If the curse attached to it anyway, the explanation has to reach beyond a literal spell on the object. The photographs behind the case complicate that further. The broken doorway is one image. Another shows the crowded burial chamber, shrines packed tightly around one another, layers of enclosure built to prevent damage to the body within. The danger begins to look less like a sentence waiting to be triggered, and more like a violation of a protected condition. Egyptian funerary practice feared injury to the king's afterlife body. The mask covered the face that had to remain intact. In that setting, curse may be the later word for what ritual protection already assumed. Disturbance brings harm, because disturbance destroys what must not be broken. Then the mask itself starts to resist even that cleaner explanation. Under raking light, the gold is not entirely uniform. The face, beard, and headdress do not match perfectly in alloy tone. The ears are pierced, an unusual feature for an adult male pharaoh image. The cartouche shows alteration. Signs cut over an earlier arrangement. Seams and joins disclose assembly from separate sections. These are not the marks of a single serene, perfectly prepared burial object made without interruption. If the burial was already stressed before modern discovery, then the curse story cannot rest only on 20th century intrusion. The compact tomb, the crowded goods, the erased names and recut inscriptions elsewhere in the burial point in the same direction. A young king dead early, equipment adapted, names revised, political and religious repair after the Amarna upheaval. The mask remains central, but not as an isolated cursed artifact. It stands at the intersection of two disturbances: an ancient burial assembled under pressure, and a modern opening publicized through death. That leaves the association intact, but altered. The headline beside the glass case still has force. So do the pierced ears, the altered cartouche, the absent curse text, the broken seals in the photograph behind it. The question is no longer why people imagine danger around the mask. The harder question is why this particular object could carry so many incompatible kinds of damage and still emerge as the single face of the curse.